Hi everyone, today in our grade 4 math video, we are going to be talking about multiplication properties. So there's a few properties that I have to go over with you that's related to multiplication, and they are all part of how we can make our multiplication problems easier to solve. So what are we waiting for? Let's get started. The first one we're going to be talking about in this video is the commutative property of multiplication. So what is the commutative property of multiplication? Well, if you look at commute, if you just add that little e in there, commute, you see that commute actually means to switch around. So I commute back and forth to school on a school bus, for example. Commute. C-O-M-M-U-T-E, commute. So what does this have to do with the commutative property of multiplication? Well, the commutative property of multiplication says that when one number A multiplies another number B, it's the same thing as the second number B times the first number A. You probably heard of this before, the commutative property of multiplication. So, for example, we could do 7 times 3 is equal to what? What times what? And this time, use the commutative property of multiplication. Yes, you got it. It would go 7 times 3, if you flip them around, which is commuting their order, would be 3 times 7. Very nice job. So now we have the commutative property of multiplication. One number A times another number B. So the first number times the second number is the same thing as the second number times the first number. Their order when multiplying does not matter, and you will always get the same answer. So, for example, 7 times 3 is 21. 3 times 7 is also 21. And 21 equals 21. So, no matter what way you rate your multiplication sentences, you will always get the same answer as long as you have the same factors. Okay, so now let's look at the identity property of multiplication. So what is a identity? Well, a identity, I-D-E-N-T-I-T-Y, identity is almost like who somebody is, what makes somebody who they are, and the properties they have. So, like, for example, you might have black hair. That is part of your identity. You could have blue eyes. That is also part of your identity. So that's all your identity. So identity property of multiplication. The identity property says that whenever you have any number, just any random number, for example, this number, I'm using letters to represent them. They're called variables. So each variable represents some sort of number. So x times 1. So any number, x is any number, times 1 will always equal itself. So x times 1 will always equal x itself. So, for example, one example would be that if you had, say, 103 times 1, it would always equal 103 itself. Or say, for example, 6 times 1, it would always equal 6. So you can always know that any number times 1 will always be itself, and it keeps its identity. Its identity does not change after the equal sign comes up. Now we have the zero property of multiplication. So this is kind of like the identity property, well, or maybe it's kind of the opposite. I'm not sure how you can say it. So the zero property of multiplication says that any number, this time any number could be represented by y. Any number times 0 will always equal 0. So any number times 0, it's always going to be itself. I mean, any number times 0 will always only equal 0. That's why it's called the zero property. For example, you could do 1,291 times 0 equals 0, or like 8 times 0 equals 0. So 0 means just that any number times 0 will always equal 0 itself. And how can you prove this? Well, really, if you're to think about what say we have 8 times 0. What does 8 times 0 really mean? Well, it's either 8 groups of nothing or no groups of 8. Either way, you still end up with 0 things. So that's the zero property of multiplication. Now let's look at the associative property. So the word associate, drop an E in there. Associate, A-S-S-O-C-I-A-T-E. Associate means to switch around and be good with different things. So switch around. And many people get it confused with the commutative property of multiplication, but there's a slight difference to it. The commutative property only works, let's quickly go back here. The commutative property only works with, okay, sorry. So the difference between the associative property of multiplication and the commutative property of multiplication is that commutative property just tells you that, like 7 times 3, for example, if you switch them the order, you'll still have the same thing. But the associative property is actually about the order of multiplying. So what numbers would you multiply first? So the associative property works like this. Say you had 3 numbers. So associative property will either have to be 3 numbers or more. So the associative property says that if you have 3 numbers, so we could do P, Q, and S. So these are 3 random numbers. You could either first multiply the first 2 and then multiply the third one. Or you could first multiply the last 2 and then multiply the first one. So what this is saying here is that the parentheses tell you which one you multiply first. So over here, you first do P times Q, and then after you do P times Q, you would times that with S. But over here, you're doing Q times S, and then after you times Q times S, you would times the P. So it's telling you that whatever way you multiply things, you could either do the first one and third one, you could either do the second one and the fourth one. There's as long as all multiplication is fine. So the order that you multiply does not matter. The commutative property says the order that you put them in does not matter. Either way, you still got the same answer. So another example with real life numbers, for example, would be, let's see. Okay, so it would go 5 times 4, and then times 3 would equal 5 times the product of 4 times 3. But the important thing here is to pay attention to the parentheses. If you're on a calculation problem and it specifically tells you to do parentheses first, then you have to do parentheses first. So let's do this. So 5 times 4 over here is 20, and then 20 times 3 would be 60 on this side. Now over here we have 4 times 3, which is 12, then 5 times 12 equals 60. So both of these sides match up. So now we have the distributive property of multiplication. Now we first need to think about what the word distribute means. Well, distribute means to split a total out to smaller groups. This isn't exactly the same thing as division, not to confuse with that, but it's just to split a total out to smaller, it's hard to write on the keyboard, groups. Okay. So the distributive property of multiplication is when you have one number times the sum of, or difference, but in this case we could do sum, a times the difference of b and c. I mean the sum of b and c is equal to ab plus ac. And I want you to notice here that over here the plus sign this is a plus sign, while over here this is also a plus sign. Well, something else we could do is a times the difference of b and c is equal to ab minus ac. So let me quickly explain what this means. As you can see over here, a is distributed into the parentheses. So a times the sum of b and c is also equal to a times the part b, and then you add it with the a times the other part, c. So this time, how we can prove that is with a rectangle. You can think of, say this is a, and then this whole thing, you're trying to multiply the rectangle. It's a times this number, that's b plus c. But the b plus c, it's inefficient or just too big to solve. So what you can do is you split it into two parts. This part that's colored green right here is called, it has a side length of A and B. A and B. And this area that's shaded red is A and C. So as you can see, this is, if you want to, we're all trying to solve for the big area here of the rectangle. So one way you could just do A times B plus C. But you can also split the big rectangle up into smaller rectangles. And then after you do the smaller rectangles, add the smaller rectangles areas together to get the whole bigger area. So that's how you can split this up into AB plus AC. The same thing works for A times the difference between B and C. So you can just also, distribute this in But the number between these two, like between AB and AC, has to be the same as the one in the parentheses. So if the one in the parentheses was addition, then over here it has to be addition. If over here was subtraction, this also has to be subtraction. So thank you for watching this video, and yeah, I'll see you next time.